We're going to bury the lead here a little bit because we're going to start with Nevada, which is a state that I think we haven't covered enough. Very interesting political dynamics there. But I think the candidates maybe are a little bit less colorful is why we and a lot of media hasn't dug into this race as much. But let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. This is a good article from the New York Times. They say Democrats' troubles in Nevada are a microcosm of nationwide headwinds. Inflation and a rocky economy are bolstering Republicans in their races against incumbent Democrats, motivating an electorate that simply wants change, as one GOP consultant says. So we're looking in particular here at the Senate race, but there are other Democratic incumbents in the House and also the governor that are in trouble. In fact, all three of the Democratic representatives in Nevada are actually in danger of losing their elections. That's the kind of situation that they're facing there. And what they're pointing to is the fact that, you know, Nevada of every state was hit the hardest by the pandemic and the, you know, shutdown policies that are associated with Democrats.
It was so bad.
The state economy is really dependent on Las Vegas and the service industry. So this was a massive hit. You have continued issues with housing affordability there as well. And so what one Republican consultant that they quoted here said, who's involved, by the way, in the campaign for, is he say Adam Laxalt? Is that how you say the dude's last name? Yeah. The Republican Senate candidate. So he is biased, but I actually think this is probably a pretty fair assessment. He says this is the purest example of a referendum election you have more than anywhere else in the country. Frustrations over inflation, he said, created an electorate that simply wants change. So, you know, in Nevada, it's actually a very interesting state because you have a really heavily unionized population. The unions are very powerful. They're the Culinary Workers Union. We talked a lot about that, especially on Rising during the Democratic primaries and caucuses there. It's a much more, Democrats actually there have a much more working class base than they do in states, say, like Virginia, where they're much more heavily on these sort of like white, affluent, liberal suburbs. And that different base is all because of both what industry is there and also the fact that it's this heavily unionized state. But then that runs into, you know, working class people getting hit hard by the economy and the fact that you have a large Latino electorate that has been shifting some to the right and increasingly identifying as Republicans, even as Democrats continue to win them. They've also obviously lost margin there. That spells trouble for Democrats. And the last thing I'll say here, let's go ahead and put the polling up on the screen. The polling out of Nevada basically the whole time has shown these races to be very close. This is the very latest poll that we have out of the state. It shows the Republican for the Senate, Laxalt, leading by 2 points. That is within the margin of error, but we've consistently, the last few polls we've gotten out of the state have shown him with an edge over the Democratic incumbent, albeit a narrow edge. And then you see, you go down the list. For governor, the Republican also has a small edge. For lieutenant governor, the Republican has a significant edge. For Secretary of State, the Republican has a significant edge. For Attorney General, the Republican has a small edge. And then, as I mentioned, all three of the Democratic incumbent members of Congress are in basically toss-up districts that could truly go either way. This is a state where the polls have been pretty accurate, which I think is part of why it has shown this tighter race all the way through. They basically got it right in 2020, very different from what we saw, you know, in the industrial Midwestern states. So I do think that the polls out of the state are more likely to be presenting an accurate picture of what's happening
And
here.
This is a sleeper, which most people in the country, or most people in the national press, are really just not paying attention to at all. And look, if they lose that seat to a Republican, it would be a game changer, because then that means that Fetterman Oz could go one way, and even Georgia, and it would still change the balance of power. So to have that scenario where you could have an upset. Also, I think the fact, as you're pointing out, that Nevada was actually pretty on the money and does show the Republicans so close to winning, we should then transpose that onto states where the misses have been very, very high, like Pennsylvania and like Georgia, and say, okay, maybe it's a lot closer there than it shows. I mean, even today, new poll out of the Philly Inquirer came out this morning, Krystal, and they're like, Fetterman is 46, Oz is 40, except Oz is closing the gap in said poll. Fetterman's favorabilities have gone up, and I'm like, or unfavorability has gone up with attack ads. Yeah. It's like, well, if the biased poll is 46-40, what is it actually?
Yeah.
To me,
toss up,
complete tie.
That's how I'm reading Pennsylvania at this point.
I think you should.
We were always, skeptical of the polls that had Fetterman up by like 12 points.
Right.
Like, this is Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Fetterman is not going to win by 12 points. I'm now skeptical of the polls that says he has a 6-point lead. I think that state is a genuine toss-up at this point. I think Nevada probably more accurately reflects the actual state of, how all of these races are going to unfold, which is basically it's a toss-up, but if you had to say, the Republican has an edge. Now, there's some interesting backstory in Nevada as well. Harry Reid obviously really built out the Democratic Party machine in the state, including, the ties directly with unions and all of those sorts of things. He has, of course, passed away. And you had a Bernie Sanders-aligned takeover of the Democratic Party in the state. I don't know if you guys remember this, but they won elections to basically run the Democratic Party in the state. And the establishment Democrats were so upset about this that they effectively sabotaged and blew up the state party apparatus. Now, my understanding is that they sort of made amends and come back together, but I'm sure there was damage that was done to this Democratic Party machine that was built by Harry Reid when the establishment Democrats just decided we don't like you, so we're going to blow the whole thing up. So that also is, another sort of issue that lurks in the background there. Now, on the other side, I would say that part of why Democrats have been able to do as well in Nevada as they have is because you do have this very strong union presence. Even as Republicans have won over some union members, union membership is still one of the strongest determinant of Democratic voting. So the fact that these are people who are organized around their material interests, that is, inherently a benefit for Democrats there. And, that's something that they've been able to rely on in elections past. So to the extent that this thing is close, I think if you didn't have that union presence, I think this would be a wipeout in favor of the Republicans. But the fact that they do have, well-organized union presence and that's very strong and helps to deliver votes for Democrats ultimately in this state could be what saves them in the end if they are in fact saved.
I think you're right. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Nevada. You can just look at polls over time. My limited understanding, as you said, is that Dems always have somewhat of a shot given that Las Vegas base of union organizing and more and the disproportionate influence it wields. It is semi-conservative, has shown us many times with upsets in the past.
It's a populist state.
It is a populist
the best way to look at it.
It's a strange place. It's fascinating to read the history of Harry Reid.
Yeah, it is a fascinating
and all of that.
Place. It's very unique.
Very unique going back basically since its history. We'll watch it closely because I think there's a lot of national wins that can be told from out of that state and what exactly will happen.
Indeed. Okay, so this is the one everyone was talking about today, which is what the hell is going on with Herschel Walker and his campaign and his family and all the rest. It's not a pretty thing to talk about, but very relevant in terms of who is ultimately going to control the Senate. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.